Hello and welcome back to my channel, and thank you so much for joining me in today's video, which is all about heatwave proofing your garden. If you live in the UK like I do, you'll have had some pretty hot weather in the last few weeks. We've had 3 heat waves here in the UK. 2 of those have broken the record temperatures for that month. We broke the record in May and we broke the record in June, and it wasn't just that there was one hot day in that month. The record was broken day after day after day in both of those times, and we're in the midst of another really large heat wave here in the UK. Temperatures of around 30 degrees Celsius for a long period of time, which for us here is very hot. I know parts of the world that isn't very hot, that's just a normal summer's day, but for us here that is considerably higher than average temperatures. I'd say comfortably in the UK we can live with around 20 to 25 degrees Celsius as our max temperatures, but as I say, it's been getting a lot warmer than that. So it's got me thinking about my garden, what's looking good and what isn't. So I want to walk through some of my favourite plants that I think will stand the test of time as we head towards the climate emergency that we're in now, that will look beautiful in hot weather, that won't fade and will be fabulous. I've got a list in front of me, so I'm going to be referring to that. The first plant that I would say is an amazing, really architectural, structural plant to have in your garden is an olive tree. And these are typically seen in Italy, in France, in those very Mediterranean, very warm areas. They like free draining soil. They like actually a fairly poor soil as well. They can cope with quite a bad level of soil, so if your soil's not particularly good, then they do well, but they do need that good drainage. And I think crucially, the problem with this planting that we're looking at, the problem with warm, dry planting is in the UK we get a lot of rainfall in the winter, and so gardens that are parched and completely dry in the summer can be incredibly incredibly wet and boggy in the winter. So olive trees are something I would say they're worth trying. You can get them in garden centres, you can buy them in supermarkets and try them out, and they will give you an amazing display of that really lovely foliage. And there's something about them that I think it just instantly sets that Mediterranean feel. So as I say, we're looking towards planting that has a bit more of a Mediterranean vibe, a little bit more of a Mediterranean feel, and I think olive trees are an amazing addition to that. They will, as I say, they do need to be kept fairly sheltered and fairly out of wet conditions. So if you've got a good free draining site, it's worth a try. They're actually quite hardy. People think they're not hardy, they actually are fairly hardy. So they should do well in the UK, that's why you do see them. And like most trees, I always recommend planting them in the ground. They're going to do much better, they're going to be much easier to look after, you won't have to water them so much, and they are going to do so much better. So olive trees are first on this list. The second thing that I grow in my garden that I love, that has done beautifully in this weather, are some of my herbs, but particularly my sage. And I grow sage in my borders as a nice sort of evergreen break in the border. I have them alongside other perennials, and I think they do really well. They create this lovely sort of sagey mound at the front, so that sage green colour that's beautiful. They create a nice little mound of that, and they do also flower as well. If you don't cut them back very much, they do flower, although I cut mine back because I think they go a bit leggy otherwise. So sage is number 2. Again, like the olive trees, they like a really free draining soil. They like something that's going to be really easy to grow, and in the winter I make sure that they're planted in an area that they still get a little bit of sunlight and they're kept out of the worst of the weather. So I've got mine in a south-facing border that does get sunshine pretty much all year round. So if you've got a really dark corner, a north-facing corner like I'm sheltering in now, probably not the one to try, but equally if you've got a free draining site, I do think sometimes it's worth trying because you never know. The third plant on the list is Verbena bonariensis. This is such a classic heatwave loving plant. Like most verbenas, it does really well in those hot, dry conditions. And when we had a really warm summer in 2022, it was one of the first years that I'd started gardening again. And I had loads of it all throughout my garden. I don't have any this year, but it self-seeds, it comes and goes. And it does do beautifully. You can buy it in the garden centre fairly cheaply. You can also buy it in little kind of pots that they've started for you, which is how I buy it, and it's very inexpensive, and it gives you these wonderful spikes of green and purple flowers. They are just beautiful. I like them particularly planted en masse, almost like a sort of wall effect around a If you plant them around a seating area, for example, or like a sunken pit, they look amazing as a sort of wall. And because they provide a little bit of privacy, they give you a little bit of a screen, but they actually do allow you to look through them. So they add a little bit, particularly in a town garden where you're limited on space, they'll give you that privacy, but you'll still be able to look out. Another plant that I think does incredibly well, and something a little bit more unusual than the others I've suggested so far, is Grevillea, which is a kind of small shrubby, well, small tree, big shrub, and it has these little pink, very tropical looking flowers on. It's beautiful in coastal areas. It copes quite well with salt as well. If you've got wind whipping in that's salty, it will do well with that. But it is, as I say, just a really good plant for those dry, hot conditions. Again, it likes free draining soil, most of these plants do, but it does just do something different. And it's a bit more of a different alternative. If you like the look of your olive tree vibe, that Mediterranean style, maybe try Grevillea, because they'll give you that slightly more exotic look. And it's just something a little bit different. And I think they're a really good one to try. The next plant on my list is Sedum, which has been reclassified by, I think by the RHS. I can't remember exactly what it's been reclassified to, it's escaped my mind, but they are classically known as Sedum, and they are this lovely, small little perennial that comes back every single year, and they've got these little sort of mounds of pink flowers. They're really, really pretty, and they'll give you a really lovely look in your garden. They come out mostly in late summer, early autumn. The variety I grow is called Autumn Joy, because it comes just as the summer's about to end. They're beloved by pollinators, and that's a really crucial time of year to have pollinator-friendly plants, because there aren't always that many things that flower at that time of year for our pollinators. So Sedum is really good, and as I say, they are just a really good doer. I've got a tiny clump that I took as a division from a family member, and it's over the years it just got bigger and bigger, and now it's at the point where I could definitely divide it and I could get a few free plants, which we always like. Now, my garden style personally is quite a cottagey look. I quite like my roses, I like my little shrubs, I like everything that's quite cottagey. And this next one is perfect if you have a cottage garden, but you want it to look slightly better in the heat. This plant is a hollyhock, and hollyhocks are incredibly easy to grow. You can grow them from seed, but what I do is I've bought them in the past, put them in the garden, and as they've grown, they self-seed, and they're a biennial plants. They come up the second year with flowers. So the first year they'll get foliage, and then the second year you get your flowers. And I absolutely love hollyhocks for the tall spikes of flowers that they give. They are really, really incredible. They're such a classic plant. I'm not nothing on my list here really is reinventing the wheel, but I just wanted to bring them into the fore because they are a plant that I think gets a little bit of hate sometimes. Not everyone likes them. I personally think they look really beautiful en masse. You've got to plant a lot of them at the back of your border, plant them in a nice clumps, they're all together, and they'll give you a lovely, lovely display. And because they self-seed so well, they do change colour over the years. So the ones you plant, first of all, will be something different as the years go on. So they're always a really, really good option. That, in my opinion, I love a hollyhock. They are just so kind of classic English cottage. They do really well even in gravel as well. And I think they cope in my soil in areas that are a little bit wetter over the winter. So it's one to mention if your site is slightly wetter and you're slightly worried that everything else I've suggested has maybe not totally suited to your conditions. I couldn't do this list without mentioning salvias. They are one of my absolute favourite plants in the garden. I know I've mentioned them a few times on the channel already, but I just love them. They are such a good performer if you've got a site that is drier, is really hot. And again, in 2022, when we had that other really warm summer, they did amazingly then, and they're doing, I can see them here from here, they're looking amazing now. And I also think that, like the previous plant I just mentioned, I think they do okay in my soil, even in the darker parts. I've got them in the shade of a 2-story north-facing wall, where in the winter, they get no sunlight for months on end until until the sun moves round and we get the sunlight again. So I would just say they are so, so good for that, and they're going to give you lovely, lovely fragrance, a little bit of that lovely kind of fragrance they're going to give, but most importantly, they're going to give those lovely little flowers en masse all summer long. They don't stop flowering from May or June right until the frosts come. They are excellent and I couldn't live without them. Okay, so sticking with the Mediterranean theme, going back to that for a moment, Agapanthus is the next plant on my list. They are such a classic plant here, and I grow them in my garden in quite a few different sites, from very, very sunny conditions to slightly shadier conditions. My soil generally is quite free draining, so I think this is why they do okay in my garden, but Agapanthus are just such a classic sun lover. They love to be baked. They also are really good for pots as well. So in this list, some of the plants I've suggested I think would be good for pots, like the olive trees, like your sage. Agapanthus though are particularly good in pots. They actually quite like being root bound, so they do particularly well. They look amazing in a line. If you've got room in your garden to have a line of them, they are just so beautiful, and they'll give you that really gorgeous blue, deep purpley, deep blue, some pale blue, but most of them are quite a rich blue colour. And again, they flower kind of from now-ish, so sort of mid-July. For a few weeks they'll give you a good display, and they are spectacular. They're a really classic, almost like a sort of bit more of a stately home plant. You see them in really big stately home gardens en masse on their terraces because they just look so good. And yeah, they give that lovely, again, that slightly more Mediterranean tropical vibe. And they're just a classic, and for good reason. They've got lovely displays, and they also make really good cut flowers as well. If you're a cut flower grower, you could plant a few and then you'll have lovely blooms to pick for your friends and family. Okay, number 9. It's another plant I've mentioned a few times here. It's the hardy geranium. Your geranium rosanne, your geranium azure rush, your geranium brookside, they're all going to give you lovely displays, and they're also crucially going to cope with these hot, dry conditions. I've got mine in the soil in my gardens. It's not great, it's not terrible. I'd say it's something in the middle, kind of an average soil, but it is quite free draining, and it gets quite dusty in the summer at the moment, and it's fine. I can see one from here. It's still got flowers on it. It's looking great. I might water it a little bit, and the one I'm looking at I only planted this year, so even in its first year in this heat, it's coping fine, and I probably haven't watered it for at least a month. I tend to find when I plant something new in the spring, I remember to water it for a few months and then I forget. So this is a foolproof one. Hardy geraniums can't be beaten, and again, if you want more of that cottage garden look, it's going to be amazing. Okay, number 10 on the list is a star jasmine, Tracheospernum jasminoides. They are the most beautiful evergreen climber, in my opinion, for a number of things. Number 1, the lovely little white flowers you get, and that lovely green and white, which I think is so calming, so relaxing. But number 2 is the fragrance. I've not really been that bothered by fragrance in the garden until this year. Something about it has just really changed for me. And I remember once I went to a garden in South Devon here in the UK called Overbeck's, which is an amazing, almost tropical garden because of where it sits in the UK. It doesn't get much frost, it stays quite frost-free, and so they're able to grow things that you couldn't grow even where I live in the Midlands. And they, as you arrive into this garden, I can still picture it now, they had this amazing wall of this jasmine, and as you arrived, I remember opening this gate and you're just hit by this fragrance. It was the middle of the day, it was a really hot day, and I just remember breathing it in and thinking, this is incredible. And so again, for that reason, I just have to mention it in this list. It's an incredibly good grower. It does well also in pots, as long as it's got a little bit of moisture. I know I said this was for heat waves, but anything in pots you will still have to water. But if you've got it in the ground, I think it's best suited, and it will survive dry periods. It will still flower and it will still be looking good. If it is distressed, it may drop some of its leaves, but in my experience of growing it, it's done absolutely fine. Unfortunately, mine is no longer here because I moved it at the complete wrong time of year during a major freeze in the winter. This was years ago when I didn't really know what I was doing, and it died. So if I hadn't moved it, I know for sure it would be growing, and I had to move it because we were having some building work done, so it had to be moved. But it is a plant that I always suggest to people who live in slightly more mild areas. So if you live in London, for example, this would do well. But even where I live here in the Midlands, it wasn't against a house wall. It wasn't against a brick wall. It was against a fence, and it did fine. In fact, it did really, really well. And I think just that little bit of protection from the fence helped it along its way. But as I say, it's a classic for a reason. People think it's a basic choice. I actually like it. Again, I would plant this around a seating area like the Verbena bonariensis to give you that lovely enveloping scent and that lovely feeling. I think it would do really, really well, and it would just be a little bit more of an unusual choice, I think, because although we see it a lot in the UK in gardens, I think it's still a plant that people are a bit afraid to grow. I think it looks really tricky, and I think you've got to give it a go because it is much easier than it looks. You put it in the ground, give it a nice mulch in the spring, give it some nice organic matter, maybe give it a feed, and it will do well. And once it's established, it will do well. So they were my top 10 heatwave resistant plants. I understand we are, as I said at the beginning of the video, moving into a bit of a climate emergency, so we have got to be more mindful about what we're planting in our garden. A few of the things that I would avoid, and one of them is my absolute favourites, and we'll get onto that. Number one, I would avoid hydrangeas if you live in a very hot, dry area. In my garden, I'm at the point now where I think probably can't plant many more in my garden. I just don't think they'll last unless they're in a pot in the shade that I can water. They'll be fine, but equally now we're in a hosepipe ban. We're not allowed to water our gardens with our hosepipes anymore because there's not enough water. So that's kind of out the picture. So hydrangeas are definitely one to avoid. Phlox is another classic favourite perennial, particularly in a cottage setting. I've got one that I can see from me here, and it's really not looking very nice. The flowers are crispy and dry. The leaves are completely drooped, and it's been in the garden for about 5 years, so it's very well established. It's not looking very good, unfortunately. And the third one are roses. They're my absolute favourite, but in my experience, roses don't like being really dry. They can cope, I think, generally in very wet soil. In the winter, I've got roses planted in areas that get quite wet, and they're absolutely fine. They bounce back beautifully. I always call them a bomb-proof plant because I think generally you can't really do anything to hurt them, but they do need their hydration. And unless they're very, very, very well established, they will struggle in the heat. And even the ones I've got that have been in the ground anywhere from sort of 20 years up to kind of 4 or 5 years, some of them are looking a little bit bad. And the main problem really with them in the heat is that they just won't put out so many flowers, and the flowers they do put out may shrivel to nothing because the plant goes into a bit of shock. And it's really the main reason you want your roses are the flowers, and in this case they won't put as many out. Again, in 2022, some of my really, really well established plants, roses, just didn't put many flushes of flowers out. They kind of stopped from kind of mid-July until mid-August, late August. They grew really slowly. So as I say, they are my favourite plant. I can't believe I'm saying this, and I would say in the UK we're still okay to keep planting them now, but just be mindful that maybe put them in an area that gets a little bit of respite from the sun. Maybe it only gets morning sun, maybe it only gets a little bit of afternoon sun, maybe it's out the hottest sun of the day, just so it stays as hydrated as it can. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. And if you like what you've seen, you can subscribe below. I will leave, in fact, I think it's there. I'll leave a link to some of my other videos. And as always, there'll be a list of all the plants I mentioned in the description. If you've liked it, don't forget to subscribe and tap that notification bell so you're notified whenever I post a new video. See you in the next one.